Welcome to The Faithful Steward. This is a podcast all about sharing biblical wisdom and practical insights in order to help church leaders pursue and teach financial freedom as part of Christian discipleship. We believe this is a spiritual conversation, and this is a place where the church needs to lead the way in order to move our communities forward in how we steward God's resources. I'm your host, James Lenhoff, and I am so passionate about this conversation and helping leaders have the confidence to step into it. We believe that if we help people thrive financially and grow spiritually, it changes everything. And I am so excited to join you on this journey. This podcast is brought to you by Good Sense. If you'd like more information about what we're up to, you can go to our website at goodsensemovement.org. All right, let's get started with today's conversation. Today we're going to talk about financial rhythms. You know, when we think about the progress that we want to make in our overall financial picture, in our journey towards faithful stewardship, a lot of times we think about the ground that we need to cover, just the amount of debt we need to pay down, or the work we need to do to build our net worth over time. And we think of these things in really big steps, that these are massive strides that we need to somehow figure out how to make them quickly and how to do them in dramatic ways. And a lot of times that's actually not the way that it works. That's not the work that we need to do. The work that we need to do is much smaller and seems much less significant, and it's rooted mostly in establishing routines and consistent patterns in the way that we manage God's resources, the way that we look at those things, understand them, and we ingrain in that process rhythms, strategies of repeatedly looking at and paying attention to these things. And those rhythms really, I think, are what ultimately lead to progress in big ways over time, but they individually feel really small and mundane. And that really is the frustration with a lot of people who are stuck in situations where they have seen these piles of debt build up, or whatever the situation is that they're facing. They just want to make it go away quickly. But wealth takes time, and time takes time. There's no shortcut. In most cases, this is just about basic disciplines that happen on a regular basis. And so I want to walk us through what those rhythms look like and the frequency that we want to check in and do this work. And the first rhythm is at minimum, a weekly rhythm of tracking. If you are paying attention to your spending, if you're trying to organize your spending plan and understand what your life costs, you need to know where those resources are going. And we think it is an absolute base level responsibility of a faithful steward to know what you did with God's resources and why. And that starts with tracking. A lot of times we'll hear people who don't spend beyond their means, and they say, I don't really track my expenses, I just spend less than I make. And we would make the argument that that is actually not faithful stewardship. Even though you don't need to track your spending in order to not overspend, you still should have a really clear understanding of what your life costs, what each of these categories looks like, what reality looks like for your family, so that if you are in a situation where you might need to make a change, you would actually know where you're starting from. Even more importantly, I do think it is a responsibility for us to have a clear understanding of where these resources went. Even if we're spending below our means, that doesn't mean we're not being reckless. And so we want to be responsible with God's resources by knowing where it's going and what we're doing with His stuff. And so tracking at a minimum in our mind is a rhythm that every week you spend 15 minutes just putting the data in. And that may be automated if you're using a system like Quicken or Simplify or any number of these computer programs that just pull the data from your financial institution automatically. So it downloads information from your bank account, it downloads information from your credit card, and it automatically categorizes that for you. All we're doing in that 15-minute work then is making sure what it downloaded was accurate, making sure it's categorized the right way. Maybe we went to Target and this time we bought groceries, but last time we bought clothing, and so it miscategorized it as clothing, and we just need to change it back to groceries, right? Those are the kinds of quick updates and just making sure that these things are being categorized so we know what our spending plan really looks like. We can't map out any kind of intention if we aren't tracking on a regular basis. And I would argue that that tracking needs to be more frequent if you're using cash than it does if you're using swipes. If you're writing checks or you're swiping cards, you will get transaction data from your bank. But if you are using cash, the only one who knows what you spent that money on is you. And so if you're gathering receipts or you're just trying to keep it in your head, the less frequent you're putting that data in, the more likely it is that you're making it up. The more likely it is that you're getting it wrong. I started the week with $200 in my pocket. I think I remember I spent $50 on gas, and I don't remember where some of the other money went, but we'll just kind of guess that it was groceries. We'll guess that I ate out a couple of times. That's probably where it went. If we're doing that, we are muddying the waters and we don't really know what our data is actually trying to show us. We're making things up. And so we want to make sure if you are spending cash that you are putting that data in while it's still fresh. Maybe it's every couple of days at least, in order to make sure you don't lose this memory of what you did with that cash. I'm a big fan of people using electronic methods of payment so that we can track it more effectively. So we know we spent $15 at Target. We may not remember exactly what it was that we bought by the time that we got it in there, but we're pretty close. We will not even remember that we spent that money if it's cash a week from now. We won't even remember that we did anything with it. And that's the problem. And so we need to be tracking frequently enough to make sure that the data that we are gathering is accurate and fresh. In the confusion and the hustle and the bustle of life, it is really easy to forget what we did. And so at a minimum, we should be weekly sitting down and just making sure all that data is accurate. That is our most important rhythm. Because if we are not doing that on a regular basis, then all of these other rhythms that we want to set up will fall apart. And so your first rhythm is tracking. The second rhythm that we want to build into our financial practices is analyzing. And for us, that looks like monthly. Once a month, as you close out the month, you're looking back and you're analyzing. What did we spend? What categories were we beyond our spending plan? What categories did we underspend this month? And what do we need to understand about what our reality is telling us? We need to analyze our behaviors, our disciplines, our decision-making. Every month, we should be able to look back and compare our actual result to what we planned on doing at the beginning of the month and see where we deviated and make sure we understand why. Maybe there was something that surprised us, something we didn't plan on. Maybe it was that we became a little self-indulgent and we just wanted to have more fun than we planned on, and we didn't pay attention. And we just kind of let our emotions get the better of us. Those are the kinds of things we need to just face. We need to face that reality. But again, we won't be able to analyze that truth unless the tracking data is accurate. We won't really be able to evaluate our faithful stewardship and analyze how we did if the numbers are muddied or the categorization is off. And so that's why that first rhythm is so important. It gives us the ability to have confidence to analyze these things correctly and make sure that we're pulling the right conclusion from that analysis. And so we analyze our decisions, we analyze how we did compared to plan once a month. The next rhythm that we want to put in place is adjusting. A lot of times people think that adjustment is something that should happen all the time. One of the challenges with constantly changing things is we don't actually know what worked. We're just changing things all the time. And so we think of that adjustment as a quarterly process. And that adjustment is really about looking forward, based on the information that we have from the last quarter. So as you think about the seasons, that's a good way to kind of picture this. Spring has a different set of spending and experiences that are built into it than summer. And that has a very different set of spending and experiences than wintertime, when we're spending a lot on presents for Christmas. These are all built into the seasonality of the year, but we don't want to just step into this next quarter, this next season, with no reference point to what has happened so far. And so about every quarter, we should be looking across those last 90 days and saying, how far off were we? Were we way off in our spending on entertainment or on presents? Did we way overspend on that summer vacation? What does that mean going forward? What adjustments do we need to make in this next season as we step into it? And so if we way overspent on birthday presents in the summer because it was a really big birthday for one of the kids, for example, what does that mean for Christmas time? If we went all out on a summer vacation and we just had all the fun and did all the things we hoped to do, we need to make sure we're adjusting accordingly for the rest of the year's spending based on that reality. If we ignore it and we just step into this next season assuming we'll be fine, but we've already pulled some of that next season's spending into this current quarter, then we're going to get to where we're digging a hole that we can't get out of. And so we need to, every 90 days, sit down as a couple, as a family, and just evaluate, how did we do? How far off were we? Were we about in line? Were we doing well? What behaviors are we noticing? What trends are we seeing across that quarter? If the spending on groceries is climbing dramatically, why? That's a nice trend to be able to pull out. Over the last 3 months, we've continued to see this go up. What's going on? Is it just that those prices have gone up, or are we eating more? Are we eating out more? Or what are we doing that's causing some of these things to get out of line? And are those things that we need to change? Or are those things that we need to adjust our expectations and just assume we're going to continue to spend more? Groceries are a great example. If the cost of groceries have just gone up, we're buying the same food, it just costs more to buy that food, then that's something we need to plan for going forward. We need to adjust our plan for the coming seasons, because that's not going away. It wasn't just a fluke. Where if we had some really big, extravagant expense that's not going to come around again, maybe the adjustment is not as dramatic. We just need to make sure we underspend in a couple of categories in order to make up for that overspending that we did this last 90 days. And then lastly, on an annual basis, we want to set up a rhythm of evaluating, really diving deep. Once a year, generally I like to see this as we turn the calendar into the next year, we take a really honest look at our stewardship over the last year. We evaluate how we did. Had we drawn lines and lifestyle caps and said, this is enough, this much and no more? Did we blow through that? Did we spend beyond that? Did we really hold to it, or did we lose sight of it? How did we do on our non-negotiables? Did we pick up the stuff that mattered? Did we prioritize the things we really care about? Or do we find ourselves spending on things that actually didn't matter and they got in the way of the things we really wanted to do? How did we do on our giving? Did we step more into generosity this year, or did we pull back and spend on ourselves? Let's honestly evaluate the work we did in the last 12 months. And in my opinion, this is a family conversation. This is not just mom and dad having this discussion. This involves the kids as well, because we need to be faithful stewards as a family unit. We need to make sure that everybody's on the same page. We're evaluating honestly how we did collectively, and then deciding collectively what we're going to do differently in the coming year. And so that evaluation process, I think, is one that people skip pretty often. We did okay. We grew our net worth, or we gave pretty well. It seems like we did all right. We're good. We'll just keep doing the same things. But unless we really spend the time to truly, honestly evaluate ourselves really challenge what we're doing and why, we'll fall into patterns that become habits that actually become really hard to break because we're so used to them. It's that evaluation that actually gives us the awareness of what needs to change so that we can actually take the steps that lead to that change. And so these are the 4 rhythms. There's that weekly, at least, rhythm of tracking. We want a monthly rhythm of analyzing and comparing. How did we do against plan? We want a quarterly rhythm of adjusting, changing the way we're approaching things, changing the amounts, changing the assumptions as we understand a longer-term trend of a 90-day example of the quarter we just finished. And then an annual evaluation of the fullness of our faithful stewardship and what it looks like to keep going even further on that journey. These patterns and behaviors and strategies that put some of these routines in place are what stack up. They feel like small steps individually, but they stack up to big, big change and large strides of progress towards faithful stewardship over time. Well, thank you so much for listening to the Faithful Steward podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for links and other information that we mentioned in today's episode. Also, be sure to check out our website at goodsensemovement.org to get all the resources we offer churches to help equip them in teaching financial stewardship to their community. If you have any questions or any topics you want to make sure we cover on our show, you can email me at jameslenhoff@goodsensemovement.org. I'd love to hear from you. I hope you all have a great week. We'll talk to you next week.